BYD is so much ahead of Tesla in China. It's like it's almost ridiculous.
The U.S. is on the brink of disaster, and Richard Wolff just exposed their fatal flaw.
The Europeans have been advising the Chinese and the Americans to work out their differences rather than to have a trade war.
European Union countries have agreed to impose new tariffs of up to 35% on electric cars from China. That's on top of the existing 10% duties.
We can now see what the effects of the tariffs that were imposed by President Trump on the Chinese.
100% tariffs on Chinese EVs. This move could cripple American industries while China surges ahead. How did the U.S. make such a huge mistake, and what happens next? China's unstoppable economic surge leaves the West behind. Richard Wolff, the well-known American economist, has been sounding the alarm for years. While many in the West, especially in Washington, are quick to dismiss China's rise, Wolff is clear. We're witnessing something unprecedented. In just a few decades, China has managed to achieve levels of economic growth that took Western countries centuries to accomplish. Let that sink in. What took hundreds of years in Europe, China managed to pull off in less than 40. And it's not just GDP numbers. It's a complete societal transformation that lifted millions, no, hundreds of millions, out of poverty. The automotive sector is where China's dominance has really shocked the world, and this is where Wolff's analysis gets especially interesting. He doesn't just point out China's economic growth. He shows us how they're outpacing everyone in the industries that matter most for the future, starting with electric vehicles. While Western companies like Ford, BMW, and Toyota were still grappling with how to go electric, China surged ahead. The story of BYD, one of China's top EV manufacturers, highlights this better than anything else. Most people in the US have never even heard of BYD. But here's the shocking truth. They're the fastest-growing car company in the world right now. And they didn't just enter the EV market. They're dominating it. They've out-engineered their competition, offering EVs that are both cheaper and technologically superior. Think about that. China, a country many once saw as lagging behind in tech, is now leading the charge in one of the most critical industries of the 21st century. But instead of rising to the challenge and trying to compete, what does the US do? They slap massive tariffs on Chinese EVs, a move that Wolff doesn't hesitate to call desperate and self-defeating. Imagine this. You're an American consumer looking to buy a new electric car. You find out a Chinese EV costs $30,000. Affordable, right? But thanks to a 100% tariff, you'd end up paying $60,000. It's a pricing barrier designed to keep Chinese cars out of the US entirely. And guess what? It's working. There are 0 Chinese EVs on American roads today. 0. Meanwhile, over in Europe, the story couldn't be more different. A quarter of the EVs on the road there are from China, with BYD leading the charge. Europe has embraced Chinese innovation, while the US tries to shut it out. So what's the strategy here? Does the US really think isolating itself from a global economic powerhouse like China is the answer? Wolff would tell you it's not just a poor strategy, it's outright foolish. Now, let's not forget that China didn't just stumble into this position. Wolff emphasizes how China played the long game, borrowing ideas from the rest of the world, but in a way that suited their own ambitions. They didn't just copy, they innovated. For years, China was seen as the cheap labor hub for the West, a place where companies could set up shop to cut costs. But in the process, China was learning, adapting, and building. Today, they're a global leader, and companies like BYD are proof of that. But the US government doesn't seem to be taking this lesson to heart. Instead, the strategy has been to cut China off, throw up tariffs, and hope that somehow American companies will thrive without facing real competition. But here's where it gets really interesting. Wolff points out that these tariffs are backfiring in a major way. While American consumers are stuck paying more for inferior products, the rest of the world is buying better, cheaper Chinese EVs. And this isn't just about cars. It's about the broader impact on American industries across the board. What's even more shocking is the political angle. Wolff shares that high-level U.S. officials, like Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, are fully aware that these tariffs are a losing game. And yet they continue to push this agenda because, as Wolff suggests, it's politically convenient. The message from Washington seems to be more about showing strength against China than actually finding a solution that works. So here's the big question. Why would a country knowingly hurt itself to send a message? Wolff argues it's a sign of desperation, a fear that China has outpaced the US and there's no easy way to catch up. Instead of collaborating or competing fairly, the US is isolating itself, and in the process isolating its own consumers from better products. And this brings us to a crucial point. If the US is failing to compete with China in electric vehicles, what other industries might it lose out on next? What else is at risk as this trade war continues to escalate? Could this strategy be the beginning of the US losing its grip on global leadership? US tariffs on Chinese EVs are backfiring big time. Richard Wolff doesn't sugarcoat it. When it comes to the US tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, the strategy is flawed from top to bottom. On the surface, it may seem like a bold move to protect American car manufacturers from Chinese competition. After all, a 100% tariff sounds like a powerful tool to level the playing field. But Wolff's assessment is brutally honest. This isn't just a bad idea, it's downright self-destructive. And the numbers back him up. Let's break it down. The Biden administration imposed these massive tariffs on Chinese EVs, which effectively doubled the price for American consumers. Imagine trying to buy a Chinese electric vehicle for $30,000, but because of the tariff, it ends up costing $60,000. That's not just a roadblock, it's a dead end. No American in their right mind is going to pay double the price for a car just to import it from China, no matter how good that car might be. The result, not a single Chinese EV is on the road in the United States. Zero. Meanwhile, the rest of the world, particularly Europe, has embraced Chinese electric vehicles, where they make up a staggering 25% of all EVs on European roads. This disparity should raise some eyebrows. Why is Europe moving forward with Chinese EVs while the US is shutting them out entirely? Wolff's argument is clear. The US is isolating itself, and this isolation is coming at a massive cost. European consumers get to enjoy top-quality electric vehicles from China at competitive prices, while Americans are left paying more for less. If the goal of these tariffs was to protect American car manufacturers, it's having the opposite effect. Instead of encouraging innovation or improving American-made products, the tariffs are shielding US companies from real competition, and that's where the danger lies. And here's where things get even more shocking. Richard Wolff points out that China isn't just making cheaper electric cars, they're making better ones. This isn't just about price, it's about technology. Chinese EVs are surpassing their American counterparts in terms of range, battery life, and overall performance. Yet, instead of recognizing the need to step up their game, US car manufacturers are being shielded by these tariffs, allowing them to continue producing vehicles that, frankly, can't compete on the global stage. Think about it. As the rest of the world moves forward, adopting Chinese electric cars, US companies are stuck in neutral, unable to keep up with the innovations coming out of China. And this isn't just a theory. Look at Europe. By allowing Chinese EVs into their market, European companies are being forced to compete directly with BYD and other Chinese brands. This competition has led to improvements in European EVs, making them better, more affordable, and more appealing to consumers. The US, on the other hand, is cutting itself off from that competition. Instead of improving their vehicles, American companies are being given a free pass to continue producing subpar products. Wolff describes this as a recipe for disaster. While other countries benefit from the innovation that competition brings, the US is falling behind. But why would the US do this to itself? Like Wolff, other experts suggest that there's a certain level of desperation behind these tariffs. It's almost as if the US government knows it can't compete with China on a level playing field, so instead of rising to the challenge, they're trying to block China out entirely. But as Wolff points out, this strategy is not only unsustainable, but also harmful to American consumers. In the long run, Americans are going to end up paying more for worse products, while the rest of the world enjoys better options at lower prices. So, what happens next? As China continues to dominate the EV market globally, how long can the US keep up this charade of tariffs and protectionism? At some point, the dam is going to break, and when it does, US companies may find themselves woefully unprepared to compete in the global marketplace. China strikes back hard in global trade war. If you thought the US tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles were the end of the story, think again. China didn't just sit back and watch as the US tried to shut them out of the EV market. They struck back, and they did it with precision. Let's start with Europe. While the European Union was still debating tariffs on Chinese EVs, China made its first move. Beijing launched investigations into a range of European imports targeting products like pork, dairy, and alcohol. Why these products? Well, it's not just random. These are key industries for European countries like Spain, France, and Germany. Spain, in particular, is heavily reliant on its pork exports to China, exporting over 1.2 billion euros worth of pork to the country in 2023 alone. By launching these investigations, China is sending a clear message. If the EU goes ahead with its tariffs, there will be consequences. But it doesn't stop there. China has also hinted at imposing its own tariffs on European exports, particularly in industries like luxury goods and automobiles. And this is where things get really interesting. European automakers like BMW and Mercedes-Benz are incredibly dependent on the Chinese market. In fact, in 2022, German automakers sold a staggering 4.6 million cars in China. If China imposes tariffs or limits imports of European cars, the impact on Germany's car industry could be devastating. Wolff highlights this as a critical point in the trade war. China knows exactly where to hit to cause maximum damage. This isn't just about economics, it's about leverage. China is demonstrating that they have the power to hurt the European Union economically, and they're not afraid to use it. Wolff points out that while the West likes to frame China as the aggressor, the reality is much more complicated. China is responding to the actions taken by the US and the EU, and they're doing it in a way that's strategically calculated to protect their interests. One of the most surprising developments in this trade war is China's investigation into European luxury goods. This is a sector that France, in particular, is heavily reliant on. French brands like Louis Vuitton, Chanel, and Dior are global giants, and China is one of their biggest markets. By threatening to impose tariffs on these goods, China is targeting a sector that not only contributes significantly to the French economy, but also holds a lot of symbolic power. It's a direct challenge to the European Union's economic clout. But it's not just about products, it's about energy too. China is playing a long game, and they've made significant moves in renewable energy and hydrogen production. Take Spain's recent deal with the Chinese multinational Envision Group to build a $1 billion plant for producing green hydrogen. This isn't just a business deal, it's a strategic alliance that strengthens China's role in the global energy transition. If the EU escalates the trade war, deals like this one could be at risk, which would be a huge blow to Europe's efforts to move towards renewable energy. So what's the end game here? China is positioning itself as the global leader in not just electric vehicles, but also renewable energy and technology. By striking back against the US and the EU in this trade war, China is making it clear that they're not going to back down. They're ready to defend their industries and their economy, and they're willing to go toe-to-toe with the West to do it. How will the West respond? Will the EU and the US continue to escalate the trade war, or will they realize that they're up against a force that's stronger and more resilient than they thought? How far is the West willing to push before they realize they're playing a losing game? Protectionism is a recipe for disaster. Richard Wolff's message is blunt. Protectionism doesn't work. In fact, he believes that it's not just ineffective, but dangerous. As the US and Europe continue to rely on tariffs and other protectionist measures to block Chinese competition, Wolff argues that they're setting themselves up for failure. History, he points out, has shown time and time again that isolating yourself from the global economy only leads to stagnation and decline. Wolff draws parallels between the current situation and past empires that fell into the trap of protectionism. He's not shy about comparing the US's current position to that of the British Empire in the early 20th century. Britain, once the dominant global power, began to rely on tariffs and trade barriers to protect its industries from rising competition. The result? Britain's economy stagnated, and it eventually lost its status as the world's economic leader. Wolff warns that the US is heading down the same path. The US tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles are a prime example of this. Instead of encouraging American companies to innovate and compete, these tariffs are shielding them from real competition. And that, Wolff argues, is the real danger. When companies aren't forced to compete, they become complacent. They stop innovating and they fall behind. This is exactly what's happening in the US right now. But it's not just the US that's at risk. Europe is also flirting with disaster by considering its own set of tariffs on Chinese EVs. The European Union may believe that these tariffs will protect their car manufacturers, but Wolff warns that the opposite is more likely. By isolating themselves from Chinese competition, European companies could miss out on the very innovations that are driving the future of the automotive industry. Take the example of Germany's car industry. For decades, German automakers have been at the forefront of the global automotive market. Brands like BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Volkswagen are known for their luxury, quality, and engineering. But in recent years, they've been facing increasing competition from Chinese car manufacturers, particularly in the electric vehicle market. Instead of rising to the challenge and pushing their innovation to the next level, German automakers are now relying on the EU to protect them through tariffs. Wolff believes this is a huge mistake. What's even more concerning is that these protectionist measures aren't just hurting the car industry. Wolff points out that tariffs have a ripple effect across the entire economy. When you isolate one sector from competition, it inevitably affects other sectors. For instance, the US tariffs on Chinese EVs don't just impact car manufacturers, they also affect the tech companies that supply parts, the energy companies that produce the electricity to power these vehicles, and even the consumers who have to pay higher prices for inferior products. And the effects of protectionism aren't just economic, they're geopolitical. Wolff warns that by isolating themselves from global competition, the US and Europe are also isolating themselves politically. The rest of the world is watching as the US and the EU build trade barriers, and they're not impressed. In fact, many countries are finding pleasure in watching the West struggle, what the Germans call Schadenfreude. They're watching as the US and Europe, once the dominant global powers, fumble their way through this trade war, and they're enjoying every minute of it. But Wolff's biggest warning is this: protectionism may lead to short-term gains, but in the long run, it's a losing strategy. The world is moving forward with or without the US and Europe. China is continuing to innovate, to build stronger industries, and to expand its influence across the globe. If the US and Europe continue down this path, they'll find themselves increasingly isolated while the rest of the world moves ahead. The irony is that the US and Europe have the power to change course. They could embrace competition, encourage innovation, and find ways to collaborate with China instead of blocking them out. But instead, they're doubling down on a strategy that has failed time and time again. What do you think? Can the US and Europe adapt to China's rise, or are they falling too far behind? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the global trade war, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Stay tuned for the next video.